Hi, I'm Mark Nemus, and on behalf of HealthXN, welcome to the Health Learning Intelligence series today. We have the honor of speaking with Anthony Swinsberg of the rapidly growing Melbourne success story, Zero Latency. So, hi, Anthony.
G'day, Mark. How are you?
For those of you that haven't heard or experienced Zero Latency, they are a free roam virtual reality platform, an environment headquartered here in Melbourne. And some of you would already have heard around things like virtual reality, and you might see it in the videos you look at in YouTube or Facebook, and may have heard some of those companies like sort of Google Cardboard or Oculus Rift, and all of these solutions are great, and it's got a bit of buzz around it, but you seem to be sort of tethered or stuck to a computer of some sort. And as the name suggests, zero latency or free roam VR has you roaming without wires in sort of a large physical space and interacting with the virtual world. So, Anthony, it's an honor to be able to speak to you today, and we're both sort of kind of rugged up because we're in different locations, but we have a very sort of large health and learning audience. So just take us sort of a little bit back to basics, and what are you seeing? So if you can describe so free roam VR, what is it about zero latency that makes it different, and what are sort of the basics around VR in this context?
Sure. Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the opportunity. Firstly, so zero latency, 2014, the capability was developed, and it wasn't long after that that we then opened up our first site in North Melbourne to the public, 400 square metres of essentially game space, and initially the technology focused on the gaming sector. This rapidly grew, and so now in about 2 years advance from there where we are now, we're approaching about 20 sites globally for the entertainment sector. Now, with most types of simulation, and over the years, that simulation has bounced between entertainment sectors and more professional remits. So in this particular case, for training, what we've found is that on a large warehouse scale, we can place a team. The team can interact with each other in really any type of environment, any type of scenario, and depending on what the training outcomes are, then individuals can interact with each other, with live role players, and also can then be, I guess, scored or checked by a training facilitator to allow repetition of training and also allow some sort of feedback from that training as well.
So if we were to sort of ask, so sort of like one of the slides we sort of have up now is sort of talking about sort of free roam versus sort of basic VR, and I find I have to explain a lot to people what the difference actually is. And I think the analogy you used was about sort of driving in the car. So the first level of virtual reality is where someone is doing something to you, and you can sort of move around and look around in different directions, but you're not really interacting with that. So on the slide now, so you've got sort of a basic room scale in sort of free form. So you know what you're doing is sort of leading edge, but really here now. What sort of the differences are you seeing outside of that?
So basically, as you can see from that slide, is with all the other different types of VR experiences that are out there, I mean, ultimately, most of those types are going to be tethered to a PC and generally therefore a single person interaction. So in our particular case, you essentially carry a very small PC on your back with a heads-up display, or head-mounted display I should say, and then the PC on your back really carries the scenario. And you are now optically tracked using an array of camera systems, which essentially like GPS tracking you in that particular space. Because you can now have live role players in that particular space, I can now be communicating with that live role player through some form of any form of interaction, be it you know, if you want to converse with people in foreign languages, or you know, whatever that you want it to be, and because it's a live interaction, the degree of flexibility in that training is increased quite significantly. So from a training sense, when you reach certain training milestones, you want to progress that training rapidly due to people's learning ability to assimilate quicker. You can change the complexity of the training quite rapidly. And we can take that as well from also superimposing scripted events, and those scripted events can also be manipulated by a training facilitator based on the performance level of the particular trainees.
So in healthcare, a lot of people say in hospitals will be used to simulation centers where they actually have a simulated ward where, you know, somebody is sort of behind a screen and is watching what's happening. They may have a, you know, some sort of an avatar, or not an avatar, but a physical, not a dummy, but, you know, basically a physical person that they can sort of interact with. In this particular scenario, they effectively are going into an empty room. And that their entire environment is dictated to them sort of virtually, and that the ability, as you said, to be able to then put them in different scenarios very, very rapidly and in real time seems to be, you know, and being able to interact with each other seems to be an absolute sort of it's real benefit.
That's correct. So, you know, choose the location. Do you want to be in the emergency ward? Do you want to be in the maternity ward? Do you want to be, you know, do you want to be walking down the hallways of the hospital? Where are the rub points where a team in a hospital environment, perhaps at the moment, can't train that effectively? Well, across the, you know, the number of medical-focused simulation systems that are out there for, you know, real tactile engagements. But what we're talking about here is training experiences which are very difficult to undertake, you know, in an immersed environment. So in this case, replicating an emergency ward, that sort of thing, to place people in stressful situations to see how they react, and so that they can be prepared for, you know, certain circumstances that may arise.
So I guess you also hinted at, so a lot of the simulation centers at the moment are very tactile, almost on a micro scale, so they can deal with it. One of the areas that's come up sort of in this context has been things like occupational violence or dealing with aggressive behavior or those sort of things. Are you seeing that? Obviously you do a lot of work with defense industries. Are you seeing that in that area, how you interact with people in that context?
That's correct. So, because of the nature of the content that can be designed, which can be any environment for the free roam space, is that and that can be a scene, and that in that scene I can then place those live role players for that physical interaction. Alternatively, I can have the I guess an avatar based with triggered events, depending on, you know, what occurs by the trainee, then will occur in return. So, it's a really flexible system. It's completely scalable. So as you can see on the slide there, is that whilst that's a 400 square metre space, the capability of the system is that it could be 4,000 square metres. It could be 200, and 200 is generally our minimum, but it could be up to 2,000, 4,000 square metres. It really just comes down to the number of computers and camera systems. And
you talked earlier as well about your different locations. So the fact that at the moment they're all in the same room, but in the same physical room, but then perhaps in the same virtual environment, there's really no boundaries now, that effectively a team in Melbourne can basically be interacting with a team in any one of your facilities anywhere else on the planet, and actually interacting in the same virtual space, solving the same learning needs. So bringing those groups together around the world at the same time is actually now quite possible, and actually interacting with each other in real time in a real scenario.
That's correct. So that's the site networking that you see there, is essentially having multiple sites networked and having interactors being in then the same virtual space. So it now reduces complexities where we might have niche teams that are dispersed geographically, and then they don't need to travel to come together. They might be niche teams that need to train together. That you know, it can be a cost-saving measure as well. That slide there just shows currently our global footprint of current and emerging locations. To be honest, that slide is changing nearly, you know, about every 2 weeks. Another site is popping up on there, and soon domestically, we've got 2 sites in Melbourne. Soon will be a site to the north around Brisbane, and then hopefully in Sydney in due course.
So if we're talking about sort of the future and the players in this space. So the companies we mentioned earlier. I mean, how do you see the future in this space? How are we finding that from a learning perspective, it seems absolutely fantastic that you can effectively train somebody in a scenario you wouldn't want them necessarily to be in real life because of because of the dangers of that scenario. But from a technology perspective, I mean, what's next in this space? Is there anything there's a bit of talk about augmented reality and all that sort of stuff, but what's sort of next in this space?
So the technology from a VR perspective is, it's quite mature where it is now, and it's extremely stable and extremely effective for training applications. Augmented reality is still quite some way off. I mean, it can be utilised now, and some organisations are using it, but it is some way off from real commercialisation. So from a VR perspective, in particular from a free roam perspective, what we're going to see is a much more clarity in the resolution that can be provided in the head-mounted displays. What we're going to see is also the power from the backpacks, or indeed completely wireless, so no backpacks, and your head-mounted display is the one single unit, which is the processor and also your visual means. It means that the resolution is going to be greater. It means that the level of immersion will be so much more advanced. So what immersion brings, plus with the repetition, it then brings the level of training, right into the trainees. It implants into the trainee's brain a whole number of scenarios and a whole number of what-ifs that could have happened, so that when something does happen, they've already got that image in their brain that they can then draw on. As technologies advance, we're going to see full hand tracking and articulation. We're going to see exportability and deployability of the system to be a lot more agile. And we're also going to see content design to be a lot more user-friendly, so it'll be being able to develop systems for training, being able to adapt those systems for training and scenarios will be a lot more agile, will be a lot more quicker in terms of response.
And I guess one of the great things about sort of virtual reality is you effectively need to really experience it to basically understand it. And what we're doing sort of between HealthXN and Zero Latency is trying to bring that experience to those particular markets. And below this sort of this webinar, you'll see there's a link there for you to actually come and actually go through and effectively learn a little bit in real time how this actually works. Come to the centres and actually go through sort of not only the learning application, but actually rig you up and actually get you into one of the sessions. So not only will you be able to learn sort of the theory about it, but the best way to learn about it is to actually be immersed in it. And so we invite you to come to one of the upcoming sessions where you can actually, with some of your peers, actually go through an experience. And I think if you hit the Zero Latency website, you can see there's sort of 4 key scenarios that you can go through now from a gaming dynamic. You can shoot zombies or not shoot zombies, or you can work on sort of building things. So I guess. Thank you very, very much for your time today, Anthony. And what we'd really like to do is invite people to experience this and learn about its application from a health and learning perspective by simply clicking below.